It Takes Balls is brought to you by our new sponsor, D's Nuts. Yes, you heard that right. If you've never heard of them, check them out at grabdsnuts.com. But warning, these are not your grandparents' peanuts. D's Nuts is really shaking up the nut game. They're gourmet, fun, and packed with flavor. Whether you're a fan of savory flavors like ranch, sriracha, or hot cheddar, spicy like ghost pepper, or if you have a sweet tooth like me, you'll like the banana pudding. D's Nuts has something for everyone. But D's Nuts aren't just about taste, they're about making a difference. For every bag, can, or piece of D's Nuts merch purchased using the coupon code NUTCHECK on grabdsnuts.com, you can save 10%, and another 10% gets donated towards supporting Testicular Cancer Awareness Foundation. So the next time you're craving a snack that's both delicious and meaningful, reach for D's Nuts. Because when it comes to supporting Testicular Cancer Awareness Foundation, it takes balls and it takes D's Nuts. Available at grabdsnuts.com, Amazon, and Walmart locations nationwide. D's Nuts, a delicious, healthy snack in a variety of fun flavors and making a difference one nut at a time. The stories shared on It Takes Balls are unique to the individual sharing. Always speak with your trusted medical provider for treatment options specific to you. Welcome back to It Takes Balls, presented by Testicular Cancer Awareness Foundation. Today I'm joined by Cristian Alvizo. Cristian's a college student in Southern California. Cristian, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So obviously you're on here because you're a testicular cancer survivor, but before we talk about that, let's talk about who Cristian Alvizo is.
Yeah, so currently I am a senior at California State University, San Marcos. For those of you guys that don't know where that is, it's in San Diego, or it's north of San Diego by 45 minutes in California. I'm currently studying molecular cell biology. I really want to be a doctor, very much influenced by my experience as a patient with testicular cancer and seeing how my doctor impacted me throughout that process and making me feel comfortable when I was probably in the most vulnerable and nervous time of my life, and making me feel comfortable throughout that process and talking to my family. I also am getting my minor in Spanish, and I actually got it because I moved to Spain for 5.5 months studying abroad there. So I got to travel to 12 different countries and kind of really explore Europe while I was there last year from January until I think May or June, something like that. And while I was there, I also really enjoyed running. That was like a new hobby of mine while I was out there, kind of exploring different parts of Europe, running. And then I got back and decided to run 3 marathons this year. So that's kind of been a hobby of mine recently, and I'm doing 3 more on the back end of the year. And since I live in California, super close to the beach in Oceanside, it's 15 minutes from the beach. I really like surfing, and I also like going to the mountains and snowboarding, and then golfing with my little brother, who's a sophomore in college now. So we try to play golf every other week or as much as we can. And so, yeah, I'm just super blessed to have the support system that I have and be in California, but also be on this podcast kind of sharing my story about testicular cancer and how that came about.
Yeah, and you've got $1 million smile. So people who are listening, you have to go to YouTube and see Cristian's smile. Like, that's worth $1 million right there. I wish my smile looked that good.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So yeah, let's talk about your testicular cancer now. You were 18 at the time of diagnosis?
Yeah, 18. I barely turned 18. I mean, okay, I was in the end of February, and then it was like April, June, kind of when I was diagnosed. I was diagnosed in the middle of June, the day before my high school senior graduation. So that kind of was a big moment for me.
Yeah. So I know you wrote this in your submission. And by the way, you wrote the most thorough submission anybody's ever sent. So thank you for that. But
of course. But
let's explain to the listeners how you discovered your testicular cancer.
Yeah. So I was playing on the golf team my senior year of high school. It was kind of weird, COVID in and out. And so that was a weird transition back into school, but kind of hybrid, and getting kicked out of school here and there based off the guidelines that were constantly changing. But I was playing golf. So I went in to get a screening routine physical. I went in, I was like, hey, is everything good? And he's like, yeah, do you think everything's good? And I was like, yeah, I mean, I don't see why it wouldn't be good. And so it was kind of very chill. He didn't do any physical exam, didn't touch me at all, really, and was like, yeah, all right, let me sign the papers. You're good for your physical, and then sent me off. And I was like, oh, that was the easiest doctor appointment of my life. Like, I didn't really have to do much there. And usually it's like, all right, they have to do the routine checks. And I was kind of like, all right, cool, whatever. But that day it was like super quick in and out. And I was like, he didn't do any checks. It's kind of weird. And so a couple of weeks went by, and I was like, maybe I should check. I don't know. I just had this instinct that not that something was wrong, but that I should do something about it. having not been checked. So then I remember checking and was like, why is one heavier and larger than the other? And maybe that was just something that I had never noticed before, but I had never noticed it. So I was like, that's kind of weird. And I didn't want to do too much research on it and like look everything up. I maybe did a quick Google search on like, is this normal for one testicle to be bigger than the other? And it was like, yeah, some sizes are, it's not all linear, right? And so it's like, it's whatever. So I decided to, actually, I was like, that's not okay. Maybe something's wrong. Why is it heavier? And then why is it harder than the other? So I called my doctor and I was like, hey, can I come in for HPV vaccine? Because that was like my excuse to get an earlier appointment. I don't know. At the time, I thought if I did it that way, maybe I got seen quicker. I didn't really know how it worked. So I just called, made that as an excuse to talk to him. Went in, was like, actually, I'm not here for the HPV vaccine. I saw my testicles. Something was wrong. I think one's bigger and I feel like it's heavier and harder than the other. And like throughout day to day, no pain, but I just felt like there was a rock in my shoe or something like that. Something was wrong. Mm-hmm. And then he checked and he was like, yeah, okay, there's a lump. There's something here. We need to send you to ultrasound. So that same day sent me to ultrasound. Went downstairs, ultrasound, got that. And that's also a very new experience for me. The way that's done, it's not the most like, it's very invasive, which is, part of it. You're dealing with genitalia at the end of the day. So it is what it is. And then you have that. And then I was like, okay, when am I going to see my results? And they're like, oh, you need to schedule an appointment with a urologist. I was like, what is a urologist? I've never heard of that before. And so then I told my mom eventually that day. So I hadn't told my parents that I was going to go to actually get a doctor's appointment that day until after. I didn't want to worry them that I was like, yeah, something's wrong. I wanted to be sure before I started freaking them out at all. And then I was like, hey, Mom, yeah, I went into the doctor today. And she's like, what? The doctor's like, you didn't even tell me? She was kind of hurt by that I didn't tell her. And in hindsight, I probably should have. And I was like, yeah, I went in, they got an ultrasound, something's there. I told my dad. My dad is kind of like, he wanted everything to be okay, as any father would want their son to be okay. So he was kind of in denial of anything being wrong, as much as my mom was also trying to be that way. Like, yeah, it's going to be fine. Don't worry about it. It's probably nothing. But you always have this lingering thought that, there's something there and I know my body and something's not right. So then I had to book an appointment with the urologist, and that took an extra month and a half to get the earliest appointment with my urologist. I think maybe COVID and like it just being on the back end of that kind of made things a little bit more difficult trying to get an appointment. But yeah, finally got the urology appointment, ended up being the day before my high school senior graduation. I'm at like a senior graduation rehearsal. I'm like, I got to leave. I got a doctor's appointment in La Jolla at Scripps MD Anderson. So I'm fortunate that that's like right there, not too far. So went down there, met with my mom. We went down there and then met with the urologist. And, that was not fun. Very impactful, but scary and unique experience, to say the least, so young. You walk in and he's like, it's just me and him. My mom's in the waiting room and I walk in with it, or do a pee sample first, a urinary sample, and then walk in. And that feeling before they walk in and you're like, oh, it's silent, dead silent. You could hear a pin drop and then they knock and like, oh my gosh, here we go. Like, this is like the moment you've been waiting for this last month and a half, trying to distract yourself that, oh yeah, nothing's wrong, but you kind of feel like something's wrong. And he shows me he introduces himself, all the above, and then shows me the ultrasound results. And you can just see a tumor, like a dark circle right on my testicle that he was showing me. And he's like, nothing good grows down there. And we assume it's cancer until proven otherwise. And then he basically walked me through that whole process, what his thoughts were, how he, where he saw the treatment going forward. He's like, I believe that an orchiectomy would be the best case for you right now because we need to know the pathology of it. We can't do any biopsies given that it could spread if we do a biopsy like that. So we have to remove the whole testicle. And I was like, wait, I'm 18 and I just turned 18, summer's starting in a day, and now my testicle's getting removed and I have high school senior graduation tomorrow and my mom's in the waiting room and I have to go get her to tell her I have cancer. Like, that's not fun. That was like the hardest part about it. But in that moment, I knew I had to be the rock for my mom because, like if I was going out there crying, and obviously I was very emotional throughout that process, but I was trying to hold it together so that she wouldn't have it as hard. And I tried doing that throughout the whole process of it. And obviously I had my moments, but away from the crowd.
Yeah, I've got lots of questions all the way through that. So first, was the doctor who initially didn't do the testicular exam, was that the same doctor you went back and saw, or was that like a school doctor?
No, he was my primary care physician. I had been seeing him. I don't remember how many, I think he was newer. I honestly don't remember. But I saw him just for the physical, but I never went back to him. I changed my doctor. Yeah. He wasn't my urologist. He was just my primary care physician, sent me off to a urologist, and then I saw a urologist and then an oncologist.
So you changed your primary, you said?
Yeah, I changed my primary.
Oh, good. I wonder if the other doctor, did you tell him like what was going on, and maybe he'll be more,
Yeah, I had a conversation with him. I think I checked in with him one more time. But it was really brief. It was like a very short, yeah, the hardest part about this whole experience is it feels like a dream, almost a nightmare, actually, not a dream, a nightmare. But like it happens and then it goes away, but it doesn't. But like that moment doesn't feel real. And so for me, just like being on the back end of it, it's hard to even feel like that actually happened in my life, but it definitely did because obviously it did. But like, it's just different. It's a unique experience where it almost was like a blur to me. And I even have to like remind myself that, oh, wow, like, yeah, you did go through that. And you have to give yourself credit for that as well.
And yeah, so kudos to you for like being 18 and making your own doctor's appointment. Cause I was making my own doctor's appointments for up until recently, and I just turned 30. So for you to like have made the doctor's appointment and then told your parents about it after, like shout out to you for being so, on top of everything.
Yeah. I attribute it to my mom and my dad. I don't know. They've always tried to make me a very independent person throughout my entire life, trying to get that out of me. So I'd always have to fill out the paperwork every time I was at the doctor's office and really trying to get that. So yeah, I don't know. I kind of took that step on that one.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then, so you were treated, you said at MD Anderson?
Yes.
So who was your doctor down there?
Dr. Zeitung. I forget his first name. I don't remember exactly, but Dr. Zeitung, urologist out there at MD Anderson. And yeah, he was a great doctor. Very smart, obviously, but a very also empathetic throughout the whole process. And I think making me feel comfortable through the way he was explaining things. I think a lot of the time you get confused and lost in the medical jargon and not knowing what that process looks like. But if I think a really good doctor breaks that down for you and makes you feel like you know what's happening to you and how you're going to move forward through the next steps of that.
And in the month and a half that it took between the primary doctor referring you to, or the radiologist referring you to urology, did anything change? Like, did it grow any more in that time?
I don't remember anything changing, really. It was always just there again, harder, heavier. And I was like, not right. Okay, we need this date to come so that I can actually get it checked out. So yeah, it was just trying to distract myself from the reality of the thing lingering in the background.
Yeah. How much bigger was it than the other one?
It wasn't, oh my gosh, massive, but it was like enough to where I was like, why is it bigger? It was at that level.
Yeah. That's kind of how mine was too.
Yeah.
So, being 18 and it's the day before your graduation. I mean, you've got your whole life ahead of you. You're just getting out into the real world. Like, what are those thoughts? What are those emotions?
Oh my gosh. I mean, you feel like you're invincible at that age. And I think even now you kind of get back into that. It's always, you get reminded every time I go to like a CT scan, I'm like, oh wait, this is something that happened. And I need to remember that this is something that I'm grateful for, my health, etc. But when you're that young, it's very isolating because you're like, wait, I'm 18. Everyone thinks summer's happening and all these things. And I'm like, I don't know what that looks like for myself. But I always tried to just focus on the things that I could control, which was how I was going to approach it, what I was going to do, and how I was feeling about it. And obviously you have to dread, or not dread, but like sit in the emotions of it at times, and it's hard. But I don't think you have to stay in the emotions of it. And so I think trying to get out of that state of being sad or worried and feeling this anxiety all the time is actually more taxing than the actual diagnosis of it. So I was just trying to get out of that as quick as possible. So I'm very fortunate to have great friends and great support systems that are super funny, and they bring laughter and joy into my life. And so surrounding myself with those people was great. But again, like I thought I was like invincible and I'm going to have the best summer ever. Right before college. And it had stunk too, because I got rejected from every college that I wanted to go to. So like, it was like rejection from everything. And now I'm going to my state school that's like 15 minutes from home. And I just got diagnosed with testicular cancer, and it's the back end of COVID. And I don't know what my summer looks like. And I was like, this sucks. I don't want it to be like this, and I hope it changes. And everything turned out to be amazing, and even more. I actually really love my school now, but at the time I had a negative mindset going into it. But I think it came with all of that being diagnosed, etc. So, but in general, it was shocking and made me realize that even if I have a plan, things don't always go to plan, and that's okay. But it's about how you pivot from the plan that you already had, and what's your new plan going forward.
Yeah. And you mentioned being like the rock for your mom. I mean, how did your mom and your dad end up taking it?
I mean, a mother being, in general, it was pretty hard for her I think it was harder for her than it was for me, the entire process, to be honest, because it almost felt like to her, she didn't do something right, is how she was explaining it to me. Like, she's like, I didn't know that this was something that we needed to be looking out for. And I felt that also to the medical system, in the sense that we don't talk about it enough. And also just in general, the stigma behind getting checked out as a male and actually being in tune with your body. I think we don't talk about testicular cancer enough, and that whole process, especially since it's the most prevalent cancer in men from 14 or 15 to 45. And so that stat alone is crazy. The fact that that's something that is so prevalent in young men, but I had no idea or even thought about, like, oh, maybe this is something we should, maybe keep an eye out for. And I just so happened was like, oh yeah, maybe I should check. And if I didn't, who knows how different my diagnosis could have been, which was stage 1A seminoma. It was really early, probably the best case scenario.
And you mentioned in your submission, I think it was your dad, you said like the Mexican upbringing. Did they immigrate here, or are you the first generation American, or had they been here before? So
my mom grew up in Vista, which is very near Oceanside, maybe like a 5-10 minute drive. My dad, same thing, grew up in Oceanside his entire life. Grandparents, immigrants, them grew up here. But they were definitely, my dad, it doesn't want to show weakness at times. And so it's just the process of trying to, you're going to be okay, everything's fine. But at the same time, you have to be in tune and knowing when things aren't fine, and not just like saying, oh, everything's fine at all times. No, there's definitely a gray area to that.
Yeah. And like with that cultural thing, I mean, is he more open now to kind of checking things now? Yeah.
yeah, definitely. Again, I think it's a shock to him. I don't blame him at all. I think it's just in general, in my family, it's not my personal my family, but like extended family. It's not them always seeing doctors and going to check, and, Hispanic culture isn't always on that forefront of medicine. So it's very different. And there's also like a kind of a scary side to that. They don't want to, see what the things that could be wrong are actually wrong. So.
Yeah. So you mentioned you got rejected from the schools and everything. At what point did you decide that you wanted to be a doctor? Was that in the interim when you were having to pivot, or was it, how did that work out for you?
Yeah. I mean, I was always interested in science. I think that's one of like the blanket statements for everyone that's kind of going down that path. I mean, growing up, and my best friend's mom's a scientist. So I was always introduced to that, and his family had doctors, et cetera. But I never was like, I want to be a doctor. Like, I didn't think that was the path. But then again, when I was diagnosed and seeing how much of an impact he had throughout my treatment and guiding me throughout that process and the journey, making me feel comfortable when I was in the most uncomfortable position of my life. And, you know, showing me that it would be okay through the evidence of what we had going through the treatment. You know, I was like, I want to be the person I looked up to in that moment in the future for other people. And I think it's very special to have that kind of vulnerability with people and guide them throughout that process.
Yeah, that's absolutely amazing. Shout out to you for doing that.
Yeah. A fun story though, too, about that is Dr. Zaitung, my urologist, I hadn't been, once I got my surgery, my orchiectomy from him, I hadn't seen him after that because I moved on to my oncologist. So I haven't seen Dr. Zaitung, only my oncologist that I do my routine CT scans because I chose the surveillance route. I shadowed an anesthesiologist that I've been shadowing the last couple of years, and I've shadowed him almost 8 times now. But he moved hospitals to Scripps Green in La Jolla, where I actually got my surgery. So super cool because now I'm like shadowing the doctor, anesthesiologist, and being in the OR watching the patients that I was. And then it was crazy because we walk into the OR and it was Dr. Zaitung doing a surgery on another patient. I didn't even know he was going to be there. And I'm like, what the heck? Like 3 years later, and now I'm like on the opposite end of it. And I was like, oh my gosh, you did my orchiectomy 3 years ago. And so it was like such a full circle moment, and it was super cool.
That's absolutely amazing.
Yeah, it was awesome.
So you're 20 now, or since the time you submitted this, have you turned 21?
21.
All right. So like you're in school, and obviously, you know, college is party USA. It wasn't for me, but I don't know how it is for you. But I mean,
yeah.
What is it like dating? Are you concerned at all about the one testicle? Does it bother you at all?
Yeah. I have an amazing girlfriend. She's awesome. She goes to UCSD. Her name's Angeline. She's great. Yeah. You know, at first you're like, is that going to be weird? But I've never like had any problems with that. I don't think that's like something. I think that's when you're actually dating. That's probably a conversation that comes up. But yeah, I was in a fraternity when I first joined college, my sophomore year of college, and it was great. It was a cool moment of my life. And then I decided to move to Spain, and then realized like, you know, I don't know, it's not like my thing. I'm going to chapter meetings all the time. Great guys. I was also doing all the pre-med things that come with wanting to become a doctor, like working in a lab, volunteering at a hospital, shadowing, trying to get straight A's because that's very important. All the above. So I was like, I don't know if this is what's right for me in my life right now. So I kind of moved away from that. And then my best friends from birth, basically, both go to my college. They actually, one's my neighbor, one's like down the street. So they both go to the same college. Like I work for his mom. It's just great. Like it's a very tight knit community. And again, I'm super blessed to have that. So yeah.
Yeah. I know you also mentioned you kind of kept it close to the vest when you're going through it, but now you're opening up. Talk about the decision to share more.
Yeah. It's crazy because every time anyone asks me, oh, you want to be a doctor? Like, why? Like that was always like my knee-jerk reaction was like, oh yeah, I had testicular cancer. This was my moment. This is kind of that thing that put me onto that path. But I almost felt like it was too much for the other person for me to be like, I just met you and now I'm telling you I had cancer and then testicular cancer, super sensitive. Like it's just all these things. And again, for the longest time when I first got diagnosed and then when I had my treatment, etc., I didn't really give myself credit for the things that I went through. I was like, it is what it is. I got over it. Like it was hard in the moment. I'm just going to move on to the next thing. And I think that was bad because I should have felt proud of myself for getting through that type of moment. And then I actually work in a lab where we study immunology and we study the skin, et cetera, and different diseases in the skin. But one of my lab members, who's now like one of my best friends and mentors, et cetera, he actually was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma when he was 11 years old. And then he had to go through that whole process from 11, 12, 13. And like he had stage, I think it's 3 or 4, chemo, the whole thing. And so he had this crazy moment of like, oh my gosh, I could die, right? This is crazy. I'm young. Like, And it just never felt to me that my early diagnosis, super quick surgery, now on surveillance, was enough to say I was a cancer survivor. It never felt like that was enough. And so I always discounted that I was. I mean, now not so much, but like, I don't go flaunting that I was a cancer survivor. Like, it doesn't feel like I was part of, even though it was very much a huge part of my life and how I am now and the way I see my life now. But in the moment, it was just never hit me the same. But I talked to him and I told him, like, the conversation came up, and he's like, dude, you were like the poster child of what they want, like the whole everything wants of cancer screening. And you took that time to do a screening and you caught it early. And now you're fine and you're doing everything that you want to do. And you telling your story is a way of spreading awareness for the fact that they can be like you. And that hit me. And I was like, oh my gosh, you're right. Like, why don't I tell my story? Why am I feeling nervous? Like that's something taboo. I'm feeding into the stigma of it, of not talking about it, by not talking about it. And in that moment, I was like, yeah, I also had those emotions of what the heck? I don't know what this is. Why is it happening to me? I'm so young. I feel alone, even though I have everyone around me, but they don't understand. I don't know what's going to happen. Do I need chemo? All the above that comes with being diagnosed with cancer. And I was like, yeah, that he had to feel that same thing. Everyone that's diagnosed with cancer has that moment in some way, shape, or form. And that's enough to say that you were a survivor of it, because no one should have to experience that. And so I think having that conversation with him kind of enlightened me to the idea that, you know, spreading my story, and even me wanting to be a doctor, I would love to share that with my patients and saying how much of an impact being on top of your health and managing changes in your body and noticing those things are for the importance of being healthy moving forward, and not having, like, the worst thing that could happen was like you stage 3 or 4 and you could have done something, but you didn't. Right. And I would hate for anyone to have to experience that. And yeah, so that was just like my eye-opening moment that I should say something about it. And for the longest time, I still didn't. Like, even after I had that moment of like, it was a slow process of getting comfortable. Like, I'm just going to tell it. Like, it doesn't matter what people think. I'm just going to say it. And that kind of led me, I did a marathon in April to raise money for the Testicular Cancer Awareness Foundation. And that was my moment of sharing my story on my social media, on Instagram. And so, yeah.
Yeah. And you raised a lot of money. So thank you so much for that. And,
yeah,
that's survivor's guilt is very real. And, with testicular cancer, an earlier episode with Dr. Perazio, we talked about it being a disease of survivors, and, the risk of like suicide and stuff after is so much higher because guys are just dealing with this in silence. So that's good that you're talking about it and you're on this podcast and sharing it.
Yeah, and exactly. And that was why, like, obviously nervous coming into the podcast, and like, it's like, I'm not the one to have all the spotlight on me. I don't like that. And so it is kind of weird to put yourself in that position, but it's not about what I like and what I don't like. It's really tell my story so that other people don't have to go through what I went through. And yeah, and one of my best friends also, her dad passed away from testicular cancer when he was 40, super young. That happened while I was in middle school. And for some reason, it still never hit me that could happen to me. And so I think I was in a position where I was so young, it happened to me, that I, I'm in a position where I could spread the awareness for it happening at a young age. And so, yeah.
Yeah. And you think of cancer as like an old man's or an old woman's thing.
Yeah.
I'm sure, I was 25 when I was going to the urologist. You were 18. So you were probably 60, 70 years younger than most of the other people in the waiting room.
Yeah, literally.
So
exactly.
So another thing that's real, in addition to survivor's guilt, is the scanxiety. So how has that been for you, like going for your checkups?
I mean, thank God everything's come up back great. All the scans have been good. Again, you get that nervousness going in, but at the same time, I try to we'll see what happens. I walk in there and I just get the scan. And it's also funny too, because I hated needles before this. Like I was like, I hate needles. I never want needles. Like, even though I want to be a doctor, I never wanted to get shots. Like that was not me. But now obviously getting your blood drawn, CTs, et cetera, you're, used to it. But another thing that comes with that is now you're just, your senses of your health are heightened, right? Like I think almost a month ago, I was getting like really bad migraines for like 2 weeks straight. And I never had migraines before. And it's just a persisting migraine at like a 6 pain. And then I had to go to the ER after like almost 2 weeks of it happening straight. And I thought it was from studying a bunch. So I'm studying for my MCAT, et cetera, to get into medical school. And like, I thought it was that, staring at screens for too long. But I go and I was like, oh my gosh, what if it's like a tumor in my brain? Like what, like, you're thinking that even though you don't, you're like, you're crazy. That's terrible. Like, why would you think that? But like, you go straight to that because you've had that experience before. And so that's one thing that it's changed a lot. But then again, like, I'm just going to do what I can. All I know is that I had to get a CT of my brain and everything was fine. And that's all I can do. And so I just try to go in with that mindset that we'll see what happens. And if it happens, I guess it was meant to be that way. And I'm just going to do what I can.
Yeah. What advice do you have for guys who are going through this?
Finding support systems is so huge. I wish I did that better when I was going through it. I mean, talking to someone that also had cancer, I didn't do that. And I wish I did until after, like, I talked to Alex. That was like the best thing I could have done, talking to him and having that experience. And sharing that experience and my emotions throughout that, because no one else understands the same way that someone who went through that process does. As much as you can surround yourself by your family and friends, et cetera, they never really will understand what it's like to have those thoughts and emotions throughout the process of it. But again, also finding things to kind of distract yourself throughout the process. I mean, I loved building Legos. Like, I mean, on my wall, there's a bunch of Legos and everything. And yeah, I'm 21, but that was my way of coping throughout the whole process of building Legos. So I love that. I love working towards something, kind of keeping a positive mindset too, as much as it's hard. And I think there's moments for negative mindsets, but not dwelling in that. Because I think if you go into all your treatments of thinking I'm not going to beat this, you probably won't. Like, not with that mindset, you will. You'll not beat it. And so doing that, keeping a positive mindset when you can, and just being honest with yourself that, this is a hard process. It's difficult for a lot of people, and a lot of people don't have to go through this. And I mean, there's a lot to be said about someone that goes through cancer and actually gets out on the other end.
Yeah. I challenge for you. I want to see you build a Lego set of testicles.
A Lego set of testicles. I'd probably be a rainbow one because I don't have the same color like that.
So this is coming out July 1st, 2024. So if you're listening to this after July 1st and before like mid-August, we're having our conference in September. Are you going to be there?
I will 100% be there.
Awesome.
I'm so excited for that.
That's another great opportunity. Like you mentioned, having a support system, like community of other patients.
I saw that and I was like, I need to be there. And I'm so happy that it's at UCSD because that's like right there near my house. So it's great.
Yeah. Where can people find you if they want to connect?
Instagram. Granted, I've deleted it here and there just because I'm studying, but Cristian, no H, Cristian Alvizo, ALVIZO.03 on Instagram. It's kind of where you could find me. Besides that, I mean, I don't have a TikTok or anything. So
that's crazy. The OT, I'm assuming, is the year you were born, and that is just insane because I'm in the 1900s. So
yeah, 03. Favorite number.
Cristian, thank you so much for being on It Takes Balls.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
For more information and resources for your testicular cancer journey, visit testicularcancerawarenessfoundation.org. You can also follow us on social media at Testis Cancer. We're on Facebook at Testicular Cancer Awareness Foundation.